All right. Welcome back. Welcome back from the break. The networking is probably one of the most exciting and important elements of the program today. So I'm a little remiss to kind of break you out of it and break you back into the room. But we do have a fantastic panel set up for you today, inspired by not only our fireside chat, but also our keynote speaker. So I'm going to ask folks to come back in. If you're in the hallway, come back in. If you are in the room, find a seat, hopefully up front here, where you can see our esteemed panelists. I'm still missing a couple panelists here. Is Dan Buch in the building? Do you see Dan Buch? Did he check in? He didn't check in? Oh, there he is. Well, that's good. Even Dan is enjoying the, one of our panelists was enjoying the break and networking during the time here. So it's totally understandable, but I am going to ask you to filter back in. And I'm going to reflect on something that Vice Chair Gunda said at the very beginning. And this is actually for the panelists here. At the very beginning of the day, he invoked the spirit of vulnerability. And I think Senator Becker actually did a fantastic job of responding to Vice Chair Gunda's invocation when he started to share some of the contents of his 7 a.m. text thread with his fellow state senators. So I think the hope here is that we will call on everyone in our panel right now and the panels later today to be vulnerable and share, and even at the risk of being a little bit controversial, because I think that will spicing up the conversation in the day today. So this panel is between us and lunch. We're going to go ahead and get started. If you did get here a little bit late and you're just arriving, I'll just capture a few items from the morning conversation. Chair Hochschild was kind enough to remind us that demand flexibility offers an opportunity not only for decarbonization and increasing reliability, but offering affordability to the system. I think we heard that reflected and echoed by our other California leaders in our earlier panel, including President Reynolds, who also reminded us that really demand flexibility offers a pathway towards electrification as well as adaptation. And then also even we've heard this theme a lot, speeding energization, which is really important right now through flexible energization opportunities, and I think Senator Becker mentioned that. So there's a number of folks here already laying down the gauntlet for the way we need to move forward is to partner and work together. And here we have on this panel a broad set of stakeholders that I'm thrilled to have join this discussion. So we do have representatives from the CPUC, the Energy Commission programs. We have folks from investor-owned utility perspective, a municipal-owned utility perspective, and even an industry association. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Before we do, I'm going to just share a brief reason why UC Davis is thrilled to convene this meeting today. At the Energy and Efficiency Institute, we administer a couple different programs that are relevant to demand flexibility. First and foremost is our Energy Graduate Group, where graduate students can get their master's or PhD degree in energy systems, and where they study the important role that demand flexibility plays in our energy system and this clean energy transition. And so many of them are volunteering today to put this event on for all of you today, so thank you to them. We also have a Lighting Technology Center, a Western Cooling Efficiency Center, our Center for Water Energy Efficiency, and our new Industrial Decarbonization Solutions Hub, all of which are working on different angles around demand flexibility and load flexibility. So many of the staff researchers that are funded by the California Energy Commission's EPIC program, again, that's funded by the CPUC's oversight of the public goods charge, are investing their time, resources in trying to solve these problems, and being able to sit in and participate in a day like this is really a great advantage for them to be able to conduct their research. So again, just want to thank you all for being here. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan Buch to make some opening comments, both introducing himself and sharing some opening remarks. Thank you.
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Dan Bush. I'm a program manager at the Public Utilities Commission's Energy Division. I'm responsible for a suite of activities centered mostly on electric rates and customer programs. So I cover electric rates and rate discounts, as well as customer generation, so rooftop solar and related programs, and demand response. So I thought for opening comments here today, I'm going to tell you my own sort of stylized history of, say, the last 12 or 15 years in this space, and give you a few ideas for where we might be headed in line with the prompts for the panel. So I want to take you back to before the bifurcation decision, to the landscape of demand response programs in the period circa, say, 2010. And I'm going to do it through the lens of what the bifurcation decision kind of found. And that is the environment we were in at that point was largely load modifying demand response programs that were, many of them that were event-based, or rates, the beginnings of rates, not dynamic rates, but of TOU rates, but again, event-based, critical peak pricing, okay? And the bifurcation decision observed that most of these resources were not particularly used and useful. I'm going to use some regulatory jargon for you, but it's not complicated. The PUC is charged with recovering rates, allowing the utilities to charge for things only if they're used and useful. We're not in the business of gold plating and then not using stuff, or at least one of our charges is to make rates affordable and not to buy stuff we don't need. And so these programs have a lot of capability, but they weren't being used particularly effectively. And so the bifurcation decision tried to shake things up. And I'm going to argue to you, I don't know if it's entirely consistent with some of my colleagues, I think the bifurcation decision was a big step forward. It was a revolution. So what did we do there? We essentially eliminated event-based load modifying demand response, and instead said, if you want to be event-based, we need to know that you're used and useful, and we want you to go into the market. We want to know that you're the right resource at the right price, and we want to verify that the load was dropped. We want to turn demand response and demand flexibility into a real resource that can be counted on by the ISO. One of the things I didn't mention just a second ago in terms of event-based load modifying demand response is that it wasn't being incorporated into the forecasts because it wasn't used and useful and therefore couldn't be relied upon for forecasts fully. So the PUC in the bifurcation decision and subsequently in building up supply-side demand response has been trying to respond to that and make demand flexibility and demand response products more used and useful. And I think that has been terrific. And on the load modifying side, at the same time, we started building the TOU rates, which are now the default in California, and produce reliable load shifts of significant quantities every day of the week. Okay? We're talking about load shifts on the order of, say, 1% off peak, and it costs the ratepayers nothing. So that's effective load reduction and load shifting. It's revenue neutral, right, at a TOU rate. So I want to tell the vision coming out of bifurcation, TOU rates that get folks to modify demand and don't cost the ratepayers a thing, and on the other side, used and useful resources, demand response, load reduction resources. Okay, so where are we today? That's the sort of bifurcation vision. Well, some things worked out, and some things worked out less well. I would say that, you already heard my punchline, TOU rates and load modifying demand response of the pricing variety has been very successful. I would say more successful than I and many of my colleagues imagined it would be when we started working on this. On the other side, I would say that supply-side demand response has also been quite successful. We have hundreds of megawatts of demand reduction. However, we also found some of the limits of supply-side demand response, or at least the limits of the model, the programmatic models that we put in place. One of the issues that we found, and this is in the DMM, Department of Market Monitoring reports for the CAISO and other places, is that some of our demand response resources are still not all that used and useful. I'm going to give you just an anchor point. I'm not talking about any specific number, but I'm talking about things that I see where we have yields on the order of 20 cents on the dollar for what we're contracted. That is not a used and useful resource. That is not a reliable resource. That is not a resource that the CAISO can count upon. So we have some work to do, I think, on the supply side of the ledger. We need a lot more accountability and performance, verifiable performance. We cannot, in the affordability environment we are in today in this state, we can't afford to pay for resources that are not used and useful. So that's my sort of challenge on the demand side, and what I see as the challenge we are still working on is to get those resources to be fully used and useful to the system. I think the other challenge and promise is that many of you have heard, we talked about the CalFuse sort of concepts for dynamic rates and the demand flexibility proceeding at the PUC. I see extraordinary promise for building on the work we've done to date on time varying rates, on TOU, to move a step further and get reliable demand reduction that is responsive to the grid and is predictable. When you get a lot of people responding to prices, you can estimate price elasticities, and actually the CAISO can have a pretty good idea that if price rises, if price rises $100, that's going to convert into X amount of demand reduction likely, and that's what they do already with our TOU rates. It's the next step forward. So that's my sort of the challenges and the promise, how I sort of frame things up for my fellow panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. My name is Beth Reid, and I'm the CEO of Olivine. For those of you who don't know us, we are a company that is lucky enough to actually be working with all the IOUs and the CEC. We actually help operate the ELRP programs across the 3 IOUs, as well as the CEC SGS program. So we have a different vantage point, I think. One of the things that Olivine was initially started for 15 years ago was really to be able to help enable, but in a little bit different way than I think a lot of the other vendors did. What we wanted to do is step into places where there was gaps. And so when there was a gap, we would try to step in and see if we could solve it. And so we did a lot of work in things like we were the first third party to go into the wholesale market to try to test things out and see what was going on and publish it. So you kind of see that in a lot of the things that we do. And we are now doing a lot of work with we're going to be in 2 of the VPP community projects and that are funded by EPIC, and we're also part of the CalFlex Hub project. So we're coming from it from a little bit different place. What I decided when I was asked to be on this panel is I think that you will get a lot of detail. You will have a lot of charts and graphs today. You will be able to see a lot of different things. What I thought I would do is at least give you a perspective on, in the last, say, 20 years, 25 years that I've been in the industry in California, of what I thought I had learned. So this isn't necessarily what everybody else should have learned, but what I felt I have learned, and maybe give you a little bit of color about why I think those things. I think the first thing that I learned, and believe me, I do a lot of lessons learned, but usually on things that are like, do this little tweak in the program, do this. I think this is a higher level situation that we're in, and perseverance. I think that everybody in this room and everybody that's involved in this industry right now needs to have, kind of dig down and really have some perseverance. And throughout my career in California, that is one thing that I have seen a lot of. And so I'm drawing on that now when I go back and look at things. Like I was first involved in the CalISO startup. And at that point, and I think there was some references from the first panel here, at that point, even though we definitely feel like the agencies need to work closer together, believe me, from my perspective, it was much further apart then. And there was a lot of different stakeholders. That was a really big sea change that was going on, and everybody persevered through it. There's been lots of examples of things that have happened in California over the last 20 years where it just took perseverance. I think the other piece of it is it took partnership. it's really important for everybody to work together and to dig into the details together. I think that's one of the things that's really going to matter here, is that we're all going to need to dig into the details. They do matter. There's a lot of things going on here. There's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of, this won't work because of this, and this is a problem here. And you know what? All those things are true. And that's the thing that I had to come to grips with this. All those things are true. The analyst in me wants to find the exact answer and get more data so I know this is what the answer is. And I think what's really important is to get more data to just figure out how to move forward, not necessarily find this perfect answer. And I've seen that in a number of arenas in the past, and most specifically in that situation. How we got through a lot of things over the last 20 years was people who I never thought were going to settle on an idea. People who I never, you know, when I first started here, believe me, I was just like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe the number of stakeholders and the complications here. But we did. Just the other day, I was talking to somebody, and they said, we were talking about the complexities and all the issues about flexible load and the different, you know, the different market model that we have in California. We can take lessons learned from other states and other jurisdictions, and I think we should. But we also have to recognize the model's different, and how do we deal with those things? And the person said to me, you know, oh, that's just very California. I chose to ignore the tone and take it as a compliment. The fact is, it is very California. We do rally together when needed to figure things out. This industry has been known to do that, and we're faced with a really significant issue in front of us. And if we've already gotten halfway there, come on, we can do the other half. This is something that can be done, but it does mean that you have to dig into the details. You have to figure out how some of these things would work. And I would say, last but not least, it's taking a leap of faith. And I think it is connected to that being very Californian. We will take a leap of faith. We will go. And I think it's, you know, put one foot in front of the other. I think a quick story I would tell you that I think brings a lot of these things together is actually our collaboration with UC Davis. This goes back, we first started talking to them and working with them in 2020. And in 2021, and believe me, there was no money flow here, just to be clear for people in the room. This was working with them to try to figure something out. And in 2021, it became very clear that the campus and people at UC Davis really wanted to participate in demand response. And you think, great. And there's a lot of evaluation. There's a lot of capability here. And getting them to participate in demand response in the wholesale market was a lot bigger leap than you might think. And so I tell you this story because I think it's an example of how these pieces fit together. It was, you know, at the time of the transition and when CalISO was first launched, there was a lot of decisions made to get past where we were to get to that full launch. And in some of those decisions, there was concepts and decisions made about contracts and who was going to do what and who was going to be what entity. And one of the things that kind of didn't really fall through the cracks but did not fit the mold was who was the UDC for the UC Davis campus. And I know people would say, I'm sure it's PG&E. It's not. And there was a lot of work in trying to figure out how that was going to work. Who was actually the UDC? Who was the meter data agent? Who was the meter data management? Where, you know, the local regulatory authority. And it took us almost 2 years of doing research and going back through old records and working with them. And they wanted to participate. This is not something where they didn't want to participate. And figuring out how, without totally disrupting the structure that they had, their work with WAPA, but without doing that, how could we make all this work? We were able to uncover documents to identify the UDC as WAPA. We were able to work with them. We ended up having to have a three-way agreement, which is typically not the way this is done. And we worked through it. And today, UC Davis is definitely in the wholesale market through us. UC Davis has participated in DSGS, and they have earned hundreds of thousands of dollars in the last 2 years doing that. They have participated whenever, even without getting paid, whenever there was an emergency event in the first couple of years before we were able to get there. And we've worked with them on, the Cal Flex Hub pilot, We've worked with them on, we're working with them on one of the community VPPs that you'll see the poster out there. We're actually working with them to, using one of our products, which is Carbon EQ, to help look at triggers and looking at accounting for the carbon in the air and aligning carbon with other grid signals. And that, to me, kind of illustrates the value of the perseverance, the partnership. We've taken a leap of faith together to just we're going to figure this out. We're just going to keep taking one step in front of the other. And today, they're fully functional in all these programs. And from I wouldn't say the research I've done, because this is not fair. This is not backed by the data. This is what I know of from my experience. I think there is, between 500 and even 1,000 megawatts of possible participation that's out there that have some of these same issues. And it's going to take digging into the details together to make that happen.
Good morning. My name is Chanel Parson, and I am with Southern California Edison. My role there is Director of Clean Energy and Demand Response. And at SCE, I'm responsible for a number of our clean energy programs that help accelerate adoption of electric technologies, as well as support the use of those technologies. So this includes demand flexibility, virtual power plants, vehicle grid integration, transportation electrification, customer generation and storage, and our demand response programs. Southern California has 50,000 square miles in southern central and coastal California and 15 million residents we serve. And we have demonstrated our thought leadership on our clean energy future in a number of ways, including releasing a number of white papers. Our most recent white paper, Countdown to 2045, outlined what it's going to take for California to meet carbon neutrality goals by 2045. And in that analysis, we identified that 90% of light and medium duty vehicles need to be electric, 54% of heavy duty vehicles, 95% of buildings need to have their space heating and cooling and water heating electric. We'll see 80% plus demand on the grid between now and 2045. And if we were to meet that demand in the traditional way, that would require us to 4x the pace of transmission build out that we do typically, and 7 to 10x the pace of distribution grid build out that we have typically done. That's not realistic, and it's not going to be affordable for our customers. We essentially don't have enough time and money to do that. So we have to find a different way. Demand flexibility is a key to that different way to help meet the load growth that we are anticipating. And so when you look at the ability to shift, shape, shed, and shimmy load, yeah, I'm not going to try that 5 times fast. And when you look at the ability to do that, we see really 3 main areas of benefits to our customers. So 1, affordability. If we can procure less power at the peak by smoothing out the peaks, that's going to save all of our customers money, whether or not you're directly participating in a demand flexibility program, whether you have a device to do so. Also, we can reduce the amount of grid upgrades that are needed at the distribution and local level, which is going to also help with affordability for all customers, not just those who have devices and can participate. Reliability is going to also be a benefit of realizing demand flexibility at scale, because we can then focus not just on bulk system reliability, but local distribution grid reliability by managing that. And then readiness. We've talked today already about how we can interconnect load faster and use flexible interconnection when we have the ability to engage demand flex at a broader scale, so we can connect the new load faster. It doesn't take the time that it would normally take to build out a circuit or build out a substation to connect some of the new load. So SCE is putting focus on continuous automated management at the distribution level for demand flexibility. So what that means, what that looks like, it's what's really is untapped, is being able in a 24/7, 365 way, communicate with customer devices, either directly or in partnership with aggregator, based on grid needs to manage the grid curve. This would not just be events, but continuous management. The automated piece ties to what we've been saying today, that it needs to be predictable. We can't just kind of hope folks will participate. As a utility, we can't defer an infrastructure upgrade if we don't know for sure what the load is going to look like, what the demand's going to look like. So we need to make sure it's predictable. Being able to have automated control of the devices will ensure the predictability. Also, there's really two ways to do this. It's that automated control way, and then there's the dynamic rate way. Automated control, it could be utility or it could be a third party. I'm a proponent of the utility driving the automated control, because when it's optimized to the grid needs, that's when all of the customers will receive the value. I think if a third party is optimizing towards prices or some other signal, you could have a gap between what is actually going to optimize the grid and affordability for all customers versus what might optimize profit for that third party. And I do think there's a space for dynamic rates. I'll get into that as we talk a little bit later. But not only dynamic rates and managed control is what I believe needs to happen. Traditional demand response has set a good foundation and learnings for the evolution of demand flexibility. And I look forward to really evolving what DR has done into DF in a continuous automated 24/7, 365 local distribution management way. Before I end, I also just want to note Southern California Edison, as an investor-owned utility, is regulated by the CPUC. So there is a little bit of housekeeping I need to do just to make sure we're staying compliant with ex parte rules. So I'd like to state that I anticipate possibly discussing topics relating to open rate setting proceedings at the CPUC. And if any decision makers at the CPUC are here, please let me know at the conclusion of my presentation so that SCE can take the appropriate steps to comply with ex parte rules governing conference presentations like this one. Looking forward to the rest of the conversation. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm David Jacot, Director of Distributed Energy Solutions at the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. I oversee energy efficiency, building electrification, and the distributed energy resource portfolio, which includes demand response, local solar, distributed storage, feed-in tariff, as well as the load management side of electric transportation and EV charging. I'll give you a little bit of background. I think Edison covered, sorry, I missed your name, but Edison covered a lot of the details of the programs, and we're in the same boat in terms of program design. It's very similar. DWP has not had an extensive portfolio of demand response for a long time, and I'll give you, until now we're getting into it, I'll give you a background. As still a largely vertically integrated utility, we have most of our generation resources in-house. And so up until 6-7 years ago, we probably had about 10,000 megawatts of generation that we controlled versus a 6,000 megawatt all-time peak. We're now down to about 8,000 megawatts because of, as we're continuing to retire fossil fuel, transition to renewables, solar, et cetera. We're down to about 8,000. We still have that 6,000 megawatt peak, so it's getting a little thinner. And of that 8,000, it doesn't all run at the same time. Some of it's down to various times for refurbishment, and a lot of it's solar, so it's intermittent. So as a consequence, we have had to start developing demand response programs where we didn't have them before. We currently have 2 programs, a smart thermostat program and a call-ahead CII program, very rudimentary. They have been very helpful. They did save us from potentially getting in a little trouble last year in the heat storm, so they were very helpful. But we are in the process of launching a much more robust portfolio of DR programs that'll give us about 350 megawatts of demand response by 2029. So we are doing that. We still, ashamed to admit this, a bit embarrassed, we still do not have widespread AMI across our system. And because we don't have AMI, we don't have much in the way of TOU. We have it, of course, for larger customers, but we don't have it for residential. So we don't have that signal to customers to be able to push them to shift loads on the basis of time of use rates. So at the moment, our approach is very heavy on these types of programs that give signals through devices. Through either active load management of EV chargers, that program will come out later this year, the smart thermostat program, or the new and larger CII program that'll be actively integrated with building management systems. So that's about where we're headed on those programs in the near term.
Fantastic setup here today, meaning everything, the speakers, the content. This is really, really exciting. I didn't realize I'd be the only one doing a PowerPoint, but I'm limited to 3, so we'll make this a little bit. My name is Joe Desmond. I'm the Executive Director for the California Efficiency and Demand Management Council. We are a non-utility trade association, 501c6, or a business league, and we've been around for 15 years. In fact, the original inspiration was then Assembly member Nancy Skinner, and so we have a lot to say thanks with her. So what I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about, our organization includes energy efficiency organizations, demand response, DER, evaluation, data analysis, and implementers. It's a full range. As a C6, we do not we're not allowed to have intervenor compensation, which means that we have to work very carefully with the dollars that we have. So I appreciate that. So hopefully you can hear me here. Yeah. Enough? Okay. Barriers. I thought it would be interesting probably to touch on some of the challenges that people have had. And granted, with other changes that are happening, I would say, almost right now, that we have to be thinking about how to advance energy efficiency and demand response from, the combination. So the first thing I wanted to say was the load shift goal, believe it or not, was proposed by the council back about 3 years ago. And so maybe you're happy about that, maybe you're not, if it increased your workload. But that's where we came when we had an opportunity to offer some suggestions about what we could do to advance California's clean energy goals. 7 gigawatts is an aggressive target, but it is achievable if the utilities and the third-party providers are fully deployed. And so one of the things is today the CPUC adoption and support of the load shift goal is critical. For third-party providers that deliver their full potential, the current rules that present barriers need to be addressed. And some of them, for example, what I would call flawed customer data access framework. This is that's separate from the limited access to technology incentives, which is to say that when customers are working through these processes, the challenge that we have here is unrealized third-party potential. And so the regulatory environment historically for DER favors IOU programs over third parties. As I said, one example of that would be some of the programs are subject to less rigorous testing requirements. The comment about the flawed data access really is the customer data access framework can be flawed. And the reason for that is that it remains a major barrier for third-party DER providers who are managing their customers in the participation of the Cal ISO. In fact, the customer authorization process to share meter data with DER providers can be unreliable, such that the majority of customers fail to complete it. And that's more of an IT information. And so I would say that the quality and timeliness of the data can fall short, which leaves a poor experience for customers, DER providers, and I believe also the utilities who want to see these programs work and work well. Another item here, just to highlight on differences, is that customers participating in third-party DR programs are ineligible to receive technology incentives through the Auto Demand Response, or Auto DR, and the statewide Self-Generation Incentive Program, or SGIP. The regulatory and funding uncertainty is still out there when it comes to different types of programs. And what I would say with some of the other comments about the dynamic rates, we are, not that we're concerned, but we think, what are the questions around those? Can accurate dynamic rates be designed that would incent the desired load shift across large numbers of customers? Will there be robust customer interest in participating in them? What's the cost of the IOU infrastructure to implement dynamic rates? And what's the business case for third-party providers to enable automated devices? It's currently unclear. And rate affordability concerns sometimes overlook the benefit of the programs on system costs, which create uncertainty, and uncertainty is really always the problem if you're a private business of what does the future look like and what can I count on and how do I plan. So there are solutions that exist. There are many good ideas, and the one that I want to say Senator Becker mentioned was going back here about 2.5 years, and Alok, I know he's here, there was a CPUC workshop, and that CPUC workshop was a presentation on a recommendation on something called a modified proxy demand resource. It's an Energy Division initiated proposal that would make available more exporting behind-the-meter energy storage to have that. And here, that opportunity is that the customer's utility meter really is an arbitrary reference point. The example would be if you thought metered buildings and single meters for a university, hospital, et cetera. Virtual metering measures aggregate net load for all service accounts in the aggregation. And here, we're talking about within the sub-lap so that you're able to take full advantage of the accessibility of that. Now, that is not currently in work, but rather we spent the last year with the Cal ISO and others on their discretionary policy initiatives. And so it turned out after all the information that we held, it was the, in this category, received the most votes that the Cal ISO is moving forward with on workshops now. So that's something that I see as very positive. We've also heard already about device level measurement. I won't go into that in more detail other to say that's important. And then the notion of AI agents. You know, there's a lot of things that are happening. I know when we talk about customers and customers willing to modify or do things differently and how they engage, there are a lot of ways in which customers could have something simplified. Now, this is in the future, but the use of AI really has the potential to make significant improvements on optimization relative to system needs. So in my last slide here, I just wanted to highlight a couple things on the data and application framework that people have been talking about a lot. There's a lot of data out there. The categories of data, you have time series, relational databases, events, schedules, structured and unstructured information, context information, comments, graph and connectivity. There's tremendous. And it's almost even when it comes to sensor or time series data, it's not necessarily recognized, but they are very, very different types of tools that you have to have compared to traditional data. And so things like transactional independent events versus continuous autocorrelated and sampled. Easy to index and search with compared to impractical to index by value and hard to search. They fall into at least 17 different ways, and it's something that I wanted to bring to people's sense, because this is what is working in many other organizations and industries to be able to have and deal with endless data-driven case possibilities. So when you think about an open platform, and I'm not arguing for any, and in fact, SEEK is just he's a member, but they are not in the business of implementing these types of programs, but rather they have the tools that have been working in the other industries, including industries outside of California that are electricity. So the last thing I would say here, and I'm just wrapping right up, that those frameworks, it's all there. It comes down to customers really want to be able to connect to multiple data sources directly, rather than having to move all their data into a central data lake. And this eliminates the substantial effort and cost required to manage those lakes. It's also, there's also a time series platform that's important, but customers really want to be able to access the data they need without having to go through IT, as this can significantly slow down their work. So with that, I'll close my comments.
Joe, and thank you to all of our panelists for some opening remarks that are setting the stage for this discussion. We have about 20 minutes for us to kind of engage in some conversation. I've got one question I'll kick it off with, one maybe inspired by Senator Becker's talk about the opportunity and importance of getting the local value and seeing the local value of some of these demand flexibility resources. So that, I'm planting the seed for you on that. That's the second question I'm going to ask. And I have a number of questions we're seeing from the audience here. But just before I get into the questions, let's just a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you. We're going to be talking later on today about doing more in-depth discussion about dynamic pricing. We're going to talk about some of the technologies and solutions being developed, and even some lessons learned from outside of California. But I think for the purposes of this panel, we really want to drill into what are some of the key lessons that we're learning from the existing programs or programs that are on the near horizon. And so I'm going to ask, within the portfolio of demand flex programs or incentives that you're touching, you're seeing, you're interacting with today, what are the most effective? And how can those specific programs be improved and scaled? How do we lean into those winners? And what can we do to even improve those? And then, the counter to that is, or an additional on that is how are customers responding to those programs and what's really driving them to participate? So I guess we'll start with you, Dan, if you want to go first.
So it's a really good question. I think the story that I told just a few minutes ago, I would say that if the first few years after the bifurcation decision were the PUC and the utilities and the stakeholders trying to get the system set up to procure these resources, to figure out how to structure the resource, working with the ISO to come up with PDRs and RDRR, that is the resources that it can actually bid into the market. Okay, at about, I want to say maybe 6 years ago, we started to pivot, where we had most of the market infrastructure for supply-side demand response in place, and then we've been looking more and more at performance, how the resources are doing, and trying to make changes to design to get better performance, to more closely align forecast and actual performance evaluated results. And I would say that we have, and so that's been a difficult process. right? So if you have a resource and you are overestimating its actual capabilities, that as you start to get better at estimating those, you bring down your forecast, and in this space, that means less capacity available as we get closer to the actual target. I would say that we are nearing the completion of a sort of that second stage of the process, where we are getting closer, I think, to understanding the value and appropriately assigning that value to resources when they come in based on our evaluated results. And so I'm really proud of that. I feel more confident in our supply side resources today than I have at any point in the past. That they will show up as we have forecasted them, based on the qualifying capacity values that we've given them going through our process. But I think we have also found, and so that has meant declining supply side capacity, because we're getting closer in terms of the reported numbers, we're getting closer to what we think the value is. And that's what we were getting on our evaluations, but not what we were awarding as capacity. So you're seeing that number come down. I feel more confident about that number, as I said, than I have ever before. But I don't necessarily feel particularly confident that it's going to go back up to where it was 5 years ago. I am not yet confident that our supply side programs, that's a route to participation for large numbers of customers, and customers whose capabilities are more limited, or who are less motivated, or frankly, who have other things to focus their time and energy on, like making stuff, doing stuff, right? And so that's where I think what I'm really excited about is CalFuse, as I have said, because I think that's the participation route for everybody else, to respond to prices and to make rational decisions about whether that's a price to respond to. Is that actually worth it to me? And I think as that gets more predictable, we get some of that load flex, we get some of that built in, and we get some response, but we also do it in a way that is more useful for customers. It's much easier as a customer, I think, if we can get there, to respond to a price, or to set up automation tools to respond to a price spike. So I think there are a lot of customers out there, for example, who would respond to a price spike, but wouldn't respond in daily arbitrage unless, for example, they had a storage asset. I think we can get to the place where we can harness that flexibility and automate that response. And I think CalFuse is the right set of signals to send it. So that's what I'm most excited about. That's not quite lessons learned, but a set of lessons learned and where we might be headed.
Well, for me, especially because of the programs I'm closest to, but I think it's really hard to ignore the ELRP and the DSGS programs. I think it's really hard to ignore the volume associated with those programs. Now, I think there's, when you ask the question about effective, well, it depends, right? There's a lot of areas where they're effective. There's a lot of areas where they're not effective. There's a lot of issues, I think, when you're looking at being able to make sure that the incentives are aligned with the behavior that you really want at what time. I think that there's a lot of things that could be reconstructed there. But if I look at one area that I think is fairly effective, I think the sheer volume of these programs tells you something. And I think also, this is my point about getting into the data, I think that a lot of people tell me that they think that people have simply just moved from ELRP to DSGS, but that's not what the data tells me. And there's a lot of issues in the data too that I would say have to do with different accounting, different appropriateness, of how people estimate things. There's a lot of areas where I think that, and we're probably going to get to that a little later, but in the fact of communication among the different entities to be able to be more effective. But if I just purely take one area of effectiveness, I think the capacity levels are impressive in my mind. And I'll give you a little bit of an idea from that. In 2023, the totals between the two were, I'm just going to give you round numbers, they're all public, but I'm giving you the round numbers, around 400. In 2024, they're now at 700. And in 2025, based on the enrolled capacity we have now, is more like 1,000. And so if you look at the combined, there is growth. There's clearly growth at looking at the two together, where you're not looking at just one program or it's just being cannibalized across. So it does show that there's some effectiveness here, and as it's continuing to grow, that I think should be tapped into.
I think it's a great question to understand what's working well, what's not working well, where we need to go. I want to talk a little bit about what we've learned, both from a program pilot rate perspective, as well as a customer response perspective, and then where I think we need to head based on that learning. So from program pilots and rates, we learned one size does not fit all. Dynamic rates, there are some C&I customers who love that. They have a lot of predictability on exactly what it's going to cost when. They can adjust their operations to really maximize their personal individual savings. But what we've learned from our residential customers is they don't want to think about energy management that much. They want to set it and forget it. They would be much more happy saying, hey, as long as my vehicle's charged by 80% by the time I leave home at 7 a.m., I don't care what you do with it between 5 p.m. and 7 a.m. And so one of the things we've learned is that dynamic rates don't do a lot of changing of behavior for most folks who are exposed to them. We've also learned that automated is supreme to behavioral. Again, if we need that predictability, which we do, to scale, we got to automate and not just expect or hope that folks will respond to information. And then we've also learned, this came up earlier, multi-device programming is needed. So core of most traditional demand response programs are a single device, but as customers are adopting a lot of DERs, it's really unlocked potential. On the customer response side of things, we've learned that customers want affordability, comfort, and ease. We learn when folks attrit from our programs, when they leave, it's because one or more of those things are off. Either their incentive is not compensating them enough for what they believe they're offering. Their level of comfort, maybe too many events have been called on their air conditioning unit, has not aligned with what they're looking for, or it's just not easy. It's not easy to participate, not easy to enroll, not easy to figure out how much money you're going to get. So those are the kind of the three things that we see that customers respond to. If it helps them with affordability and their comfort and it's easy, they'll respond. When one of those things gets out of whack, they won't. And so what I think we need to do to improve and scale is policy that allows utilities to do more piloting programs and testing to scale quickly on different things that work. We need to do more of testing this automated managed utility sends a grid signal, real-time optimization to grid, and we need to do it at some scale. Just getting 10 or 20 customers and seeing what they'll do is not really indicative of what the masses will do. We need technology that will support the ability to direct control these devices at scale rather than having to enter into multiple agreements with multiple aggregators for specific devices. That's slowing us down and it's very costly. Financial, we need incentives for early adopters to learn and accelerate. So if we're running programs and tests to figure out what's going to be the right suite of options to offer our different customer segments, I want to make sure we're incentivizing these customers to jump in and be these early adopters and help us learn. But then make sure that we phase out those incentives so that customers don't think of it as an entitlement that forever and ever they will get an incentive for a certain thing, because the affordability savings they get from participating will also be an incentive as we get there. Rates, I think we need flexible and dynamic rates. When I say flexible rates, I mean time of use. So if the utility is using grid signals and doing it at a local level to manage the demand curve, having small increment dynamic rates actually restricts flexibility, because if it is more valuable for the grid to have the EVs start charging in the 10 to 11 hour, but if the rate is aligned with it being more expensive in the 10 to 11 hour, then that's going to be optimizing on price and not optimizing on what the grid needs. And so having those broader flexible bands will allow the utility to determine what's needed where and at what times, because it could be very different in different circuits. And then collaboration. We need the sharings, the learnings, the ideas, the partnerships. This is across OEMs, service providers, utilities, regulators, across states, across countries. So those are the 5 things I think we need the policy, tech, money, various rates, and collaboration.
Well, you test it, find out what works, and we'll copy it.
Deal.
Full disclosure, so I've been in DWP for 13 years, but prior to that I was at Edison for 9.5. So I saw a lot of the things that Edison was doing in DR, 14, 15 years ago. And there were 20 programs, and about 4 or 5 of them delivered 90% of the dispatchable load. And a lot of them were social engineering programs, types of things that required the customers to pay a lot of attention. And yeah, you're right, set it and forget it. You want the customers to stay enrolled, so you give them opt-out opportunities. The pain of staying into the program should be less than the reward they're getting from it. So when at DWP we got serious about needing to have some DR programs, we wanted quick wins because we needed to stand up a couple programs quickly. And one was a CII program, and it was structured to give the CII customers, a pretty hefty reward for every time they dropped load. And we would call events, a pretty manual process. And if they dropped load per the terms of the agreement, they would get a pretty good spiff. I can't remember what it was, a couple $100 per KW that they dropped, I think is what it was. And we'd true it up at the end of the season. That was the one program, and the other one was a thermostat program. And this was one that, so I was running EE at the time, I wasn't running DR. And on the DR side, the department was trying to figure out, did we want to go with a proprietary thermostat? Of course, it's always a bad idea, but there was a segment that wanted to do that. I was pushing out smart thermostats, non-proprietary, for energy efficiency, getting it into the market. By the time the department was ready to do a DR program involving thermostats, we had seeded the territory with 60,000 smart thermostats, mostly Nest, but a lot of Ecobee, Siemens, and others. And so there was an infrastructure. And so at that point, it's go out and get an aggregator and bring those on board. And that's what we did. So we were able to stand up between those two programs 75 megawatts of dispatchable load in very short order. So the thermostat program enrolled and marketed through the aggregator. Customers will sign up, get a reward at the end of the year, and it worked through an app. And it works through, we have the program currently, it works through an app. And the customer gets notified every time there's going to be an event, and the customer can, right on the phone, can opt out. So it's an easy opt-out. That helps overcome that issue of them always, if they have a comfort issue and they didn't know there was going to be an event, and now it's hot in the house and they're irritated, it's right there on the phone. And so we've had great retention. People love the program. We have very high response rate to it. And it's very reliable. We have, I want to say we've got about 45 megawatts signed up, and we reliably see 40 megawatts drop off every time we call an event. So just to reinforce, we had, like I said, because we didn't have any programs, historically, and we had to set something up quickly, we went straight to tried and true, set it up quick, set it and forget it. Customer doesn't have to think about it. Ease of participation, ease of not participating if you don't want to, because that keeps the customer still in the program. They don't get so frustrated that they say, well, I'm just going to drop out of this program altogether. So that has been the success for us. Going forward, the key we're really focused on with this new portfolio of DR programs that we'll be rolling out. Transportation electrification is key to our decarbonization efforts, and we're already 200,000 chargers in the city, and 200,000 EVs, I should say, registered EVs. And so we need to do the same thing we did with thermostats and start aggregating those chargers from a load management standpoint and get those folks on board. And again, set it and forget it type of approach to get customers set up for that. That one's going to involve helping them program their cars to take advantage of it. Again, we don't have TOU rates, but that doesn't really matter when it comes to programming the car. You program the car to charge certain times and not charge certain times. We can also, obviously with the managed charging, with the chargers, we can do the same thing. So it's going to be a combination of education, set it and forget it, and various strategies to make that happen. But it's really key that what we don't want to have happen is we get more and more vehicles on the grid as they all come home and plug in at 6, and boom, we get that spiky peak. So that's it's almost an existential situation that we're working towards making sure it doesn't happen.
Thanks, David. I'm going to let Joe answer this as well, but before we get to that, I do want to acknowledge you talked about thermostats. Clearly, just some of the questions and comments that I've heard, it's pretty cold in here, and so we're working on trying to address that issue. We're going to be flexible about it. I appreciate your flexibility, but we are working on that. All right, Joe, go ahead.
I'm going to be very brief because we have a number of our members here that have different ideas, different strategies. You're going to be hearing from them. And so what I would highlight again is the importance of what I think you said, which is customers really want to do something different. You know, in other words, they're not thinking about energy every day. And in fact, the CPUC's own research itself identifies that 95% of all customers look to the monthly bill when they make decisions about where they want to go. And so I'll just pause with that.
And thanks to all of you. We're entering the lightning round, okay, which is pretty exciting. But before we do that, Dan, I'm going to let you answer one specific question, which I think is mostly directed to you, which is, are resources like batteries dispatched daily in a load-modifying program more used and useful, the technical term there, than supply-side programs dispatched based on price triggers at the system level?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'm not sure which one I think is more used and useful. What I'm most excited about is the idea that we could do both. And so I'm going to plug here. PG&E actually has a new program. It's ART program, Automated Response Technology, I believe. And they do both. So the design of the program is to have daily load shifting as part of the sort of the programming for it, and then to have a supply side resource on top. So I frankly, in the supply side kind of context, I think that's the ideal. The most used and useful asset is the one that is the most responsive to all the challenges.
That's cruise control and braking, automated braking as well. Okay, fantastic. All right, this is the lightning round question. It's really been inspired by Senator Becker's comments during his speech, which asked us to think about the local value of load flexibility, which may not typically be calculated into the value that load flexibility is bringing. And so, lightning round we're between them and lunch, so we got to be quick on this. And Joe, I'm going to start with you. What are some thoughts that you have about how we should be thinking about that local, how do we capture that local, or think about capturing that local value to the distribution system from load flexibility? And you can also just pass if you would like.
Yeah, I'm going to pass because I don't delve into those details at that level. So other than we want to make sure that we are capturing the benefits and customers get the benefit from that itself.
Fantastic.
So for LADWP, we are committed to fully decarbonize our supply side by 2035, and you know that's all well and good with the generation mix, but it's got to work at the distribution level as well. To the degree that we have distribution automation, that helps us know where the pinch points are, but we have to have distributed resources out there as well, so we can ameliorate those pinch points without having to entirely rebuild the distribution system down at the circuit level. That's where we're going to need storage, generation resources, but also EVs and vehicle-to-grid. Vehicle-to-grid with managed charging is really going to be the future to help us at the circuit level and the distribution level.
Love the VGI shout out. Also to optimize and maximize the local benefits of demand flexibility, it will be important that we have scale so that we have multiple folks who are participating, that it's automated, that it's managed. Again, we're not hoping that folks or, respond to different things, and that it should be managed by the grid signals. I still think price signals are helpful in some cases, but for the masses, I think the grid signals will unlock the most value for all customers, because we're optimizing on the grid, which all customers have to pay for instead of money, which the value of that money can be shifted around to different stakeholders.
Well, I think I'm probably just reiterating or speaking to the choir here, but I think that this is a really thorny issue. And I think it involves, I think everybody wants to align the incentives properly. But I think what we should be doing is looking at the resources that do exist, because it's going to throw the roadmap for the new resources, and really be looking at the automation that Chantel's talking about and the communication among the parties. Because I think, everybody talks about unlocking the stacked value, using the distribution grid, the supply side. How can we use this one resource for all these different needs? But I don't think that that is anything that we feel like we've got knocked. And I think that would be one area that if we could really focus on that and at least effectively be using all the resources that we currently have while we're creating more resources, I think we leapfrog up into that 7,000 number.
I think the thing I'd like to add to the conversation here is that at least the CPUC has been working on this question for quite some time, and I want to admit that it has been a very difficult one to resolve. We've tried a number of different things to try to get our handles around how these DERs could be effective in reducing the cost of grid upgrades, avoiding and deferring grid upgrades, how that could contribute to affordability. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we actually have cracked it. I don't think we have. I think we have a long way to go. I will tell you the thing that I'm most excited about is that that stack is represented in a dynamic price. And so the thing I'm most excited about there is that I think the PUC is very much interested in incorporating locational elements into dynamic prices. We've incorporated them into the pilots thus far. And that signaling in aggregate should give you the signals for more efficient grid utilization and to reduce costs for grid upgrades. That's a distributed kind of a solution, but I think it actually has some promise in overall reducing some of the costs for the grid infrastructure that we have not been particularly successful in constraining with our other programs.
Well, we've run out of time here, but I really appreciate all of your comments today, and appreciate your participation on this opening panel. The good news is that you've earned lunch, and I think everybody here has earned lunch. So we're going to break now, and we're going to reconvene for panel 2, our second panel of the day, starting at 1:05. So please enjoy the warmth outside as well as the food.